Hi, Ed Mahoney. I'm with Ross Pepe from the CIC, and one of my roles is liaison with a lot of municipalities, and I'm also a former town supervisor.
Jane Eny, Councilwoman, Town of Mamaroneck, and citizen.
Abby Katz, Councilwoman, Town of Mamaroneck. Judy Gabra from Kansas Cortina.
Janice Andrews, Mayor of the Village of Larchmont.
Mary Lee Berridge, Summit, and your money changer and your attendance keeper. So, both.
John Bradley at Home on the Sound.
Denise Wooden, Rye, YMCA.
And the speaker at Home on the Sound and the Summit.
Kay Francis Richards, Mamaroneck Larchmont Human Rights Committee, the Summit, Washingtonville Housing Alliance. And just to remind you, you still have time, if you have not already done so, to get a ticket for the Washingtonville Housing Alliance annual spring dinner on May the 3rd. If you need more information, please see me when we leave. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Richard Allen, the pastor of Mamaroneck United Methodist Church, and let me put a plug in for Amy Jill Levine, a New Testament scholar, a Jewish New Testament scholar. Vanderbilt Divinity School will be at my church on June the 21st. It's a Thursday evening, sponsored by Westchester AJC and us, of course.
Elizabeth Sanger, Westchester for Change.
Sanger,
Rob Waldman, Center for Aging in Place.
Julie Fitzgerald, Eddie Becker Summit, and Home on the Sound.
Bob Hyde, Summit, at Home in the Sound.
University of Petty, the Summit.
Iris Freed, Hope Community Service.
Selwood Freed, Physicians for Social Responsibility and Physicians for National Health Program.
And I'm Elaine Chapnick, President of the local summit. I'm going to turn the program now over to Nina Petty, who will introduce our speakers today.
Thank you, Elaine. Good morning, everyone. I moved here a very long time ago, and they've been talking about replacing the Tappan Zee Bridge since I moved here, which says something, but it seems we are approaching the real deal. We are really honored to have the panelists we have here. We have Christine McCarthy, who is from the county, the Westchester League of Women Voters, the county board, and she's been on their committee studying, the task force studying the Tappan Zee Bridge construction. Can you hear me? No. Okay. Talk right into the head. Yeah, that's it. Veronica Vanderpool, who is with the Tri-State Transportation Campaign. Ross J. Pepe, who is representing the committee to build the bridge now, NewYork.org. And Phil Musigas from Riverkeeper. And I will tell you a little bit more about them as they step up to speak. I want to just make one more comment, and that's I wanted to thank Bob Hyden and Carolyn Pomerantz, who really worked very hard to pull the panel together. And I think we're really lucky and very grateful to have you. So we're going to start with Christina, who is, as I said, on the board of the League of Women Voters of Westchester County. And she was on the committee that was studying the Tappan Zee Bridge. She's also, now I do need glasses. She was also spent 7 years on the Tappan Zee Bridge Stakeholder Advisory Working Group for the New York State Department of Transportation. She works for a major insurance company in the actuarial area and is an MBA PhD candidate in program for knowledge management and transfer. So, Christina, thank you.
Good morning and welcome to the summit. Thank you very much for having us in attendance today.
This is a better microphone. This is.
I turned it off. I was asked to give a brief overview of some of the history behind the Tappan Zee Bridge and how we got to this point and some of the propositions on the table. As some of us in the room may or may not know, the Tappan Zee Bridge did open in 1955 to traffic, at which point there was not as many cars and there was not as many trucks and there was just not the population up here in this area that there is today. Back in 2000, the bridge ended its useful lifespan, as the study called it, where it was up for replacement. We needed to go through, do a study, look at some alternatives, and find out some possibilities for how they would rehabilitate the bridge, if they would replace the bridge, or if they would change the bridge. And that is where we kind of begin our journey for today. They did what they called a short-term transportation demand management program, and they also looked at a long-term capital improvements program. The long-term capital improvements program is the program that gave 6 options out on the table that was studied to go over the bridge for the Tappan Zee Bridge, as well as the road to the east in Rockland and the 287 corridor through Westchester County. They did a number of studies on that, and if everybody looks at the PowerPoints that was handed out, you can see there was a brief history given where in 2002, the New York State DOT put out a notice of intent that they were going to prepare alternatives for the bridge, asking the public and local contractors to present ideas and alternatives. There were alternative modes for transportation and transit options that were being looked at. The county, the New York State DOT, the MTA, and the Thruway Authority looked at a number of these options at the time when they were also looking at doing the 287 corridor. One of the options that they did look at was bus rapid transit, where you can have a 1-seat ride starting in Rockland County, taking you across the bridge, connecting you in Tarrytown to the Metro North, and bringing you into the city. That option did require that the New York State DOT do additional work not only on bridge rehabilitation, but also on the 287 corridor, and additional work for mass transit to run across the bridge. Now, why are we actually studying this, and why are we actually looking at this? And why would a 1-seat ride from Rockland down to Manhattan and into Westchester actually be beneficial? And why is that something that we're looking to do? Well, the Tappan Zee Bridge happens to provide the only interstate highway crossing across the Hudson River for the entire 48-mile stretch, all the way from the George Washington Bridge in the city up to the Newburgh Beacon Bridge. So this is a very vital connection between the two sides of the bridge, between the two counties, not only for cars and traffic and transit and people like us that use it for commuting, for recreational purposes, or for going to work, but it is also the largest area for freight transit across the bridge, especially for our tractor trailers. The bridge is also a bypass route around New York City for those same tractor trailers. Trucks that are traveling all the way from New England, which you wouldn't realize that the Tappan Zee Bridge does actually connect, all the way down to areas west of New York City and into Pennsylvania. So this is a very vital section, not only of our community, but also of the economics in New York. The Tappan Zee Bridge also carries traffic from 87, which is the New York State Thruway, all the way across the Hudson River. I'm sure many of us sitting in this room have gone across the bridge today. One of the issues that came up in early 2011 was a financial analysis of all of these different options, not only the different bridge options, but also all of the mass transit options, and the cost for enhancing the 287 corridor. The financial analysis at the time was going to be a combination of private investment, some federal money, and additional monies put in through yearly and annual budgets from the state and from the DOT and from the Thruway Authority. In 2011, they realized that they didn't have the money and they didn't have the financial commitments and backing to go across the Tappan Zee Bridge, to go into the 287 corridor, and to also do repair work to the areas in Rockland that would connect that area to the bridge. So there was a notice of intent put out October 12th of 2011, and project scoping meetings were begun. There was a DEIS study, which is an environmental impact study, to find out what this construction and what these options would do to our environment, to our noise, to our traffic levels, and I'm sure my colleagues will touch on that in their presentations for their specific pieces. Once this DEIS study was done, they began doing further analysis on the bridge, on the different options to see where they wanted to go. There are two different options for the bridge that is currently on the table. One of those bridges would be considered a short span bridge, and the other option that is still on the table would be considered a long span bridge. Now, when I first heard those terms myself, I thought, you only have X amount of distance to go across the river. How could you possibly have a short bridge or a long bridge? Well, in reality, and you do have a diagram in front of you, a short span and a long span actually doesn't mean the distance across the river. It means the height underneath the deck of the bridge that is being constructed. The long span bridge option, and I won't give you all the construction details, feel free to read it in your packet, or you can also go out to the internet, and they have many designs and construction, and if you're into engineering and want to read about all the heights and widths and lengths, you can do that there. Bottom line, the short span construction option means that there is not enough space below the deck after the bridge is built for a construction company to come in and add mass transit. So if we do go with the short span option of the bridge, there will not be the option, without tearing down the bridge and going through this process again, of adding mass transit at a later date. If we go with the long span option, it's actually going to be two new truss bridges. The upper level of it will be the car level. It will be similar to the bridge that we have in design today. You'll have your traffic of not only your automobiles and your trucks going across, but you'll also have bike lanes and pedestrian lanes. And it will give you enough height underneath the bridge, 96 feet wide, for the potential option later on of mass transit to be added. You can have bus rapid transit, you can have a light rail transit, you can have a combination of the two, but that would hopefully be the option that they would go with at this point, obviously bearing costs that are involved and the outcome of the environmental studies. But that would be the option for the future for greater expansion that would be needed in order to have a mass transit component added on once the bridge is built today. There are in your packets some eastbound, westbound lanes and emergency access lanes. There are some diagrams and drawings of what the actual top of the bridge would look like once it was constructed and where the cars would be approaching and not approaching. And I just want to leave you today with a couple of options about alternatives that were looked at to get where we got today. There's obviously the no-build alternative, which was looked at by the state originally. That was a baseline that needs to be done for all studies, especially for the DEIS and the environmental impact study, to just kind of show where we are today and what would happen if trends and traffic continued without any type of enhancement for the bridge. Then they looked at a rehabilitation alternative, which would mean not replacing the bridge, keeping the existing bridge, repaving, doing some structural work to supporting beams, and an ongoing process. They decided that this would not be applicable for their needs today due to the fact that it would be constant construction on the bridge. The bridge would be past its lifespan from when it was built, and we would still in another 2 or 3 years, when they did another study, be faced with the same situation that we're in today. So that brought us to the last two options. Replace the bridge with either the long span or the short span that we just discussed, or a tunnel alternative, where you would take down the Tappan Zee Bridge and your traffic would have a tunnel underneath. They did some studies on this, and they found that the tunnel alternative was not the best alternative at this time because of cost, because of environmental impacts, and because of the large, extensive work that would need to be done for delays as well as if there were accidents or other situations in the tunnel, they would not be able to get emergency personnel and services in as quickly as if you did have the bridge option. If anybody has any questions afterwards,
I think we're going to
we'll
be
answer
taking
more.
questions at the end, okay? Our second speaker is Veronica Vanderpool.
Hold on.
Yeah, I do need that. Our second speaker is Veronica Vanderpool, who's with the Tri-State Transportation Campaign. I told you I couldn't do this without glasses. She's going to talk about the role of the Tri-State Transportation Campaign in securing and advocating for public transit on the bridge. And Veronica is the Associate Director of the Tri-State Transportation Campaign. She previously worked at the Rainforest Alliance and also worked for the New York Department of Environmental Protection in the wastewater treatment upgrade program. She has a master's in environmental science and policy, and we're very happy to have her here. Thank you.
Thank you, Nina. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you to talk about this very important issue. Again, my name is Veronica, and it's nice to be amongst you all as Westchester residents, because I myself am also a Westchester resident. I live in the town of Eastchester. Just a little information about Tri-State Transportation Campaign and what we do and what our involvement with the Tappan Zee Bridge issue has been over these many years. Tri-State Transportation Campaign is a nonprofit policy advocacy group. What that means is we work with everyone from the community resident to commissioners, governors, agency officials, and our elected officials, both locally at the state government and in federal government, to ensure that our communities are livable and walkable, meaning that we have pedestrian amenities that make our streets safe to walk for everyone of all ages and ability, children to seniors, to ensure that there is adequate investment in our public transportation systems, to ensure that those who choose not to have a car or who cannot drive still can take advantage of the amenities and services within a community by getting there via public transportation. And we do that work with a variety of different tools. We do policy analysis, so we take all this complicated data and information that is not comprehensible to most people, and we try to distill that and provide that to the general public in a way that is easy to understand. And we take those materials and use them as policy documents with our elected officials to show them, for example, how much New York State is spending on improving sidewalks in a given community, so that way our elected officials can push administrations for more money for communities. And that's just one specific example. Our involvement with the Tappan Zee Bridge has been, like many of us on this dais this morning, has been for many years. Tri-State Transportation Campaign, like the League of Women Voters, was part of the original stakeholder group. We've been involved in this issue since 2006. And in 2006 and beyond, we had been pushing for bus rapid transit specifically on the Tappan Zee Bridge. We are not against rail. In fact, we never like to pit one mode of transportation against the other. Tri-State Transportation Campaign just favored bus rapid transit because it was a very flexible, affordable way of bringing transit into the corridor. And I'd like to emphasize the word affordable, and I will be talking about costs in a few minutes when I get to that portion of our discussion. So I want to start by saying the intent of Tri-State Transportation Campaign is not to delay this project. We've always been supportive of replacing the bridge. We understand the value of the bridge as a transportation conduit between Rockland and Westchester, and of course for the region. We've always supported the replacement of the bridge. And like many stakeholders in this conversation, we've supported the implementation of transit on the bridge. One of the reasons we support the replacement of the bridge is because we understand the importance of it to this regional economy, but we also talk about the the importance of transportation infrastructure to the construction industry. And we are well aware, and we respect and agree with Ross and others who have been talking about the need to bring these construction jobs to the region. We know that the industry is suffering from a 17% unemployment rate, and we appreciate and understand how important transportation infrastructure and the construction of it is, not only to people who are building the bridge, but all those additional services that support construction work. But we also support the maintenance and creation of transit jobs as well, manufacturing, operation, and maintenance. And we just want to, put that forward as well. So our intent is not to delay the bridge. What we want to do is encourage the governor to move forward with transit on the bridge. Many of us have been very disappointed that he dropped transit from the plans. And the reason why we are so surprised by this is because for many years, the state had studied this, and the overwhelming outcome of numerous studies and $100 million of studies and more than 280 public stakeholder meetings was that transit absolutely had to be part of the bridge. And I will read some information for you that is directly from the state's study documents in 2010. In fact, it says, the 10 years of study that preceded the current Tappan Zee replacement project found that adding transit is the only way to meet mobility needs on the bridge and in the corridor. In October 2010, a state presentation unequivocally stated, and this is a quote, "New transit is the only way to relieve congestion and improve mobility in the corridor." Again, that is a quote from the state's study documents. So for the governor to want to move forward with the bridge, to expedite this bridge and remove transit from it, raises some serious concerns for us. In fact, we believe that by doing so and dropping transit from the bridge, the governor is actually violating some state and federal requirements, specifically NEPA. And given that he's using costs as the single determinant for dropping transit from the bridge, he nor his administration have fully substantiated why the costs are what they are, and they need to under the NEPA process. What the governor has said and what his administration has said is that putting a bus rapid transit system on the bridge would cost between $4.5 and $5.3 billion. That is more than adding a commuter rail system into the corridor. In fact, the industry standard for a bus rapid transit system around the country, around the world actually, does not exceed $25 million per mile. But according to the governor's recent estimates, he's putting a bus rapid transit system at $150 million per mile. And when groups like Tri-State and others have asked the governor to explain why the cost is 4 to 5 times more than what the state had said just 2 years ago, we have not yet received that information. In fact, what we had to do was foil that information under the Freedom of Information law. And none of our groups have received information from the state on why they've estimated this bus system to be this amount, yet the governor has used that justification to drop transit from the bridge, which again raises concerns about transparency and accountability. If the governor is in fact dropping transit because it is too cost prohibitive, but is not explaining to the public how they arrived at that number or why the cost is indeed that that amount, that certainly raises flags, and we are still waiting for the state to respond to our Freedom of Information law requests on these particular numbers. And again, it raises issues of accountability and transparency. Many of you might know that in 2010, the governor signed a wonderful piece of legislation called the Smart Growth Infrastructure Act. And what that does is instruct state agencies to consider a variety of smart growth principles when they're building infrastructure projects, such as the Tappan Zee Bridge. And the governor, in fact, is not considering those principles of this legislation that he signed, and we heralded that action. And in fact, he's not following the criteria of that act, and we think that that is, again, in violation of some of the legislation and some of the principles that he's espoused in his campaign and throughout his administration as important to New York State: sustainability and smart growth. And this project, as it stands right now without transit, is certainly not a sustainable transportation project for this region. So what we're doing is working with everyone, all different voices, to encourage the governor to put transit back in. And we're not saying that a bus rapid transit system need be, at the very onset, a very expensive endeavor. Let's phase it in. We want to work with the administration to propose some short-term, inexpensive fixes that would not delay the project in any way, but that would make accommodations for transit to run as soon as the bridge opens or shortly thereafter. We are not content and are concerned with the governor's assertion that the bridge will be built not to preclude transit, because several statements and points that are in the draft environmental impact study actually contradict that very statement of not precluding transit. And what we want to do is suggest some clear recommendations for how to get started on a bus transit system, and then over time, as more funding becomes available, as the federal government reauthorizes its federal transportation bill, then we can secure additional funds to make this a full bus rapid transit system corridor. We're not saying all of this needs to happen on day one, but what we want is a commitment from the governor that says we are certainly committed to adding transit to the bridge, and this is how we will do so. This is how we will ensure to the public that we will have a new bus system, different and improved than the existing Tappan Zee Express bus service that runs now in this corridor. And one suggestion we have is for the governor to actually say that the emergency access lanes that will be on the new bridge can actually be used for bus rapid transit. And just to be clear, this is a separate lane from a breakdown lane, and a separate lane than a shoulder. Each of the new spans will have 4 travel lanes for cars, 2 shoulders on each side of the span. One span will have a bike pedestrian walkway, and each span will have a 5th lane, which is termed an emergency access lane. We are asking the governor to call that emergency access lane a bus rapid transit lane. And again, that would not impact, if there's an emergency vehicle that needs to travel, it would have precedence. It would not impact if there's a breakdown. This is not taking anything away from improving the mobility of the corridor. So to wrap this up, I'm just going to say that we're working with all of you and many elected officials and groups and local residents to encourage the governor to move forward on some very short-term, inexpensive initiatives to get transit on the bridge, and then devise a longer-term strategy for how to find funding to have the kind of system that we would all like to see, and that the state had actually endorsed and was working toward just 2 years ago. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Mr. Ross Pepe, and he is representing, as I said, the Committee to Build the Bridge Now, NewYork.org. He is going to talk about why build a bridge now. His area of expertise is transportation construction, and he's the president of the Construction Industry Council of Westchester and the Hudson Valley, and also the Building Contractors Association of Westchester and Mid-Hudson, and we're very happy to have him here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me today. It's a great opportunity to speak about a project that is like none other in the Hudson Valley region. It, in fact, will be the largest construction program ever to take place in this region, and actually New York State, with the exception of some of the largest structures in the city, but those have never approached the dollar volume or the quantity of materials that this project will involve. Both presenters before me explained a lot of detail with respect to the structure and the replacement plans for the existing bridge, and I don't feel I need to go back into that. We should, just for knowledge base information, know that the bridge is used every day by about 135,000 people making trips across the bridge, either into Westchester from Rockland or into Rockland from Westchester. And that growth is amazing as to how it's taking place, going in the reverse direction now as the economy expands and grows over in Rockland County as well. It is also a major interstate highway connector for Route 287, 87, and ultimately to I-95, and our parkway systems, local roads, so it not only serves local needs, but it also serves regional and northeastern needs. It's as an interstate highway, it connects the heartland of America, essentially with New England. At 9/11, it was the southernmost structure that was left open. All of the structures south of the Tappan Zee Bridge were closed. And the lifeline into and from New York City and Long Island and this region to upstate or any place else in the country via road was the Tappan Zee Bridge. So I mean, it's an important thoroughfare that we have to maintain and keep operational. We have little disagreement with the matter of having transportation, mass transit infrastructure on the bridge. We agree that mass transit is an important component for the future of the region. In fact, the replacement span that's been proposed and is being designed by, there are 4 teams, I think Christina may have mentioned that earlier, that have been chosen to submit their proposals. Each one of those will be including a plans for adding mass transit components to the structure. All of the foundations, footings, towers, and components of the bridge will be built to accommodate mass transit of any kind when it's finally finished and open. That could be bus rapid transit or rail. The conditions on the bridge as it is today, it has lived its useful life. It was designed at a time when the country was built at a time when the country was coming out of 2 wars. The availability of materials was low as the rest of the country was expanding. The interstate highway system was just giving its breath as President Eisenhower demanded it be built across the country for military purposes, actually. We wound up with a bridge that, unlike others that had been built in the region before that, if you look at the George Washington, the Brooklyn Bridge, any of the New York City structures, this bridge only had a 50-year lifespan, and it has exceeded that lifespan now by about 8 years. The bridge is in some serious condition of disrepair, both steel, concrete, wood piles that need to be taken care of immediately. And it also happens to sit on a series of caissons. It's not anchored in bedrock, the entire west causeway of the bridge, and the center span as well. It floats basically on a series of caissons that are structured over a silt basin, essentially on the west side of the Hudson River, sitting on wood piles that are driven into the silt where it hardens down in the lower ranges. And those piles are deteriorated and being affected by some boring animals that exist in the salt water conditions that we have. So it needs to be replaced. I don't think there's any question that anyone would have about that. The question of mass transit is one that needs to be addressed, and we believe it is being addressed in the proposal by adding the components that will allow for a mass transit system to exist. The bridge essentially is the first stage of mass transit. Without the new bridge, without the components built into the bridge to accept mass transit, there is no regional mass transit system that will ever follow. So the first step is being taken in the construction of the bridge right now as it's being designed. If it follows through this, by the way, there is an expedited process, as has been mentioned, with respect to the environmental study that's underway. I sat on the Westchester Rockland Task Force that was appointed by then County Executive Spano and also County Executive Vanderhoff to work with state government in coming up with the plans for the bridge. The issue of mass transit was widely discussed and agreed upon that it was necessary, and we think that this new bridge is the first step towards that. The issues related to the environment, we believe, are being dealt with adequately and correctly. There was a study that was underway for many years, an environmental study that was kind of slogging through the process and was going nowhere. was probably in place, it was underway for about 5 years. And part of the reason was that it grew from a project that was a bridge replacement to a project that was the development of a 30-mile long corridor for mass transit. And once that changed, the whole environmental study had to change with it in order to go forward with any aspect of the project. And as you can imagine, when you're dealing with a 30-mile corridor, essentially from Port Chester to Suffolk, there are many issues related to the environment, traffic conditions, local community issues, and whatnot that take many years to resolve. Unless those matters were finished and finite, the bridge project and the corridor project could not go forward. We would be studying this project for the next 20 years still if that process had not been changed. What changed was that the federal government set up a process where they would expedite the environmental review of projects that were clearly underway already and allow for these projects to go through the DEIS and FEIS process on a quicker basis and be funded by both federal and state funds for the project to go forward. The process accepted much of the data that had been studied for the past 5 years in the existing process that was underway for the new bridge, the state environmental reports. Simply what they did was take out the information from that report, repackage it for a new DEIS report that was in place for a bridge only. It's not like they just took everything and threw it away in the garbage can. They excised from that existing report all of the information that was necessary for the bridge to go forward. So the expedited process allowed for, in months instead of years, there to be a DEIS issued, series of hearings held. There were some 650 comments that were submitted and are being studied right now. And a final environmental study should be issued sometime this summer, and hopefully a record of decision for the project to move forward in August or September of this year. So my message is, we think the bridge needs to be built now. We believe that there should be no impediments put in the way of the bridge being approved and going forward now. It is the first step of the mass transit system. As far as jobs are concerned, yeah, we want the jobs, we need them. I wish it was only 17% unemployment. Actually, some of the trades that we work with, I represent management, but some of the trades we work and negotiate with today in this county, across the Hudson Valley, have 35 and 40% of their people out of work long term, no longer have health benefits for their families, no longer have the ability to send their kids to college and whatnot. So we want these people to get back to work, and that will generate an economy in this region that is necessary and needed. We're certainly prepared to, as an industry, do everything that we can to get this project moving forward quickly. And thank you very much again for the opportunity to speak, and look forward to working with all of you. And I also want to say hello to Nancy, and Nancy and I have worked closely together over the years. She and I sit on a couple of panels together, the Clean Water Jobs Coalition, which was formed back in the 1990s. It was given life right down the street here in where Stouffer's used to be, when there was an environmental conference there, and we kind of circled around them with some concerns that we had issue with respect to moratoriums on building development at the time. And from that came a coalition that has since then worked well in going to Washington, going to Albany, getting the funding for improvement projects. And ultimately we actually set up a program called the Sound Guardian Award, and this Long Island Sound Guardian Award. And this Thursday we'll be down at the Water Club presenting award to recipients for the DEC, DEP of New York, and industry representatives for people who have worked to try and improve the conditions of the Long Island Sound. So I'm proud to have worked with Nancy over the years on this. So thank you very much.
Here, thanks very much, everyone. And thanks to my to the previous speakers. I think they've laid out the issues pretty well. I'm going to spend a couple of minutes, and I have the benefit going last of we've already talked about traffic issues and jobs, and I really want to focus in my comments on what Riverkeeper's mission and what our goals are. And of course, we have concerns about the in-river impacts of building a new bridge. We also share the concerns or the questions raised by Tri-State Transportation Commission about the lack of a good alternatives analysis and the lack of addressing mass transit sufficiently on the current bridge proposal. So, but I want to just take 2 quick minutes and talk about where Riverkeeper is in case people aren't familiar with our organization. We are a nonprofit membership-supported group. We've been working on the Hudson River for over 40 years. Our mission is pretty simple. It's to protect and restore the Hudson River ecology and the ecosystem, and also to protect New York City's drinking water supply. We work in the watershed on issues like hydrofracking and other things. So Riverkeeper has been involved with the Tappan Zee Bridge project, or these different proposals addressing the bridge, since they started, I think, around 2000. We were on the community advisory groups that are attached to this process throughout. And so we've been intimately involved, not only with addressing the in-river impacts or talking about those, but also talking about the need for public transit and how to address that in the best way possible. So I'm going to spend a couple of minutes and talk about our concerns with the process so far. I want to focus a little bit also on our Riverkeeper's comments to this draft environmental impact study that you've heard a little bit about. And I want to encourage folks, we don't have time today to go into a lot of detail, but if you go to our website, it's www.riverkeeper.org. We filed detailed comments on the draft EIS, and they're up there on our website if anyone's interested in looking at those. And we have some supporting studies on the cost of a new bridge, on the environmental impacts to the river, and also on traffic flows and traffic volume, things like that. So lots of good information up there. We hired some independent experts to look at this draft EIS to do a review of it. So we think we have a good solid response there. Just in terms of process, I want to talk a little bit about it because Ross mentioned that this bridge is being conducted under an expedited approval process, and of course, that's a good idea in many ways, but we do have concerns in this instance that the public's concerns and the public need for public input has not been fully addressed by Governor Cuomo and by the state, and the reason for we talk a lot about process, and I think oftentimes people become concerned that too much process leads to too much delay. And as Ross said, people are out of work. We need to get people back to work, and we need to address the Tappan Zee Bridge issue. So, it's not a matter of pushing for more process to have delays. It's a matter of pushing for a good process so the public has a real chance to know what all the alternatives are, know what the costs are, and can give public input to inform a good decision about how to go forward in the future. Because as you heard today, this is probably the biggest construction project, public works project in the Hudson Valley in a very long time. Whatever we build in the next few years is going to be the bridge that we will have for the next few decades at least. If you look around New York City and the state, we have many bridges around New York City that are very, very old and are constantly being rehabilitated and rebuilt. And so if we're going to do this project and spend billions of dollars of federal and state money, we want to make sure we spend that money wisely. And again, going back to the mass transit question, we really think it's critical that mass transit be fully addressed on this bridge proposal. So just in terms of process, I think you saw in Christina's presentation, we had a over 1,000-page draft environmental impact study come out in January. The state gave the public about a month to give comments. We asked for a little more time. We got a couple more weeks. Just a comparison, there's a brownfields cleanup project in Sleepy Hollow that's going on right now. It had a 30-day comment period. We asked for more time, and they gave us another month to look at that. And so it's entirely reasonable to have more time to give public input. And I mentioned this, and I spend a lot of time on this because we have been working closely with the local communities that will be affected by the Tappan Zee Bridge. This is Tarrytown and over in Rockland County in Nyack and South Nyack. And the mayors of those communities are very concerned that their voices are not being heard, and they're very concerned that the impacts to their communities from building a new bridge are not being fully addressed and have not been fully explained. And they're not opposed to a new bridge. They believe that we have to address this issue, but they want to make sure that their local concerns are balanced against the larger concerns of having a new transportation corridor. And so, we think there should be an adequate time for that. Just in terms of alternatives, briefly, Veronica mentioned a little bit about the alternatives analysis, which is a critical part of this environmental review. Whenever you do an environmental review like this under state and federal law, you need to look at all the what they call the reasonable alternatives, so we make sure that the public sees the full range of options, basically. What each one costs, how long they would take to build, and what the environmental impacts would be. And unfortunately, this current draft environmental impact study, we do not believe does a good job of talking about all the alternatives. The tunnel is a good example. The draft EIS simply says that the tunnel will cost $7 to $8 billion and will take too long to build, and so we're going to disregard that. It doesn't provide the supporting studies for that. It doesn't talk about looking at other tunnel projects around the world, which tunnels are often built. There's a tunnel recently built in China to deal with a similar issue as this. Tunnels are built in Europe and Scandinavia frequently because, in fact, if the funding is there and if the conditions are right, they present less environmental impacts from actually dredging across a river and building a new bridge. And so we're not suggesting we think the tunnel is the best option. On all of these alternatives, what Riverkeeper is saying is the state needs to do a better job of telling the public what the alternatives are, what they really will cost, and giving the public the chance to give input on that. And also on this question of that we've been going through this process for 10 years now, and we've done all these reports. That is absolutely true. That there's been a stack of reports that will probably knock this table over if you put them all up here that talk about the impacts to the river and talk about all the alternatives. The problem is that entire earlier process never got to the point of getting public comment. There was never a draft environmental impact study produced before January of this year. They started the whole process and they ended it before the public could really comment on what the public thought was the best alternative. So I just want to focus, just want to mention that. I just want to use a couple more minutes and then I want to make sure we have time for questions. But Riverkeeper's concerns, of course, because we are Riverkeeper, go to the in-river impacts of this project. And our concerns with building a new bridge and demolishing the old bridge have to do with the methods that they are proposing to build the bridge. And essentially, there are two kinds of impacts. One is from dredging, and the other one is from putting the pilings in the river. And under the current proposal, the state is proposing to dredge, and by dredge I mean basically dig out a channel. They're basically proposing to dredge a trench, very wide trench, that will cut directly across the river, across the width of the Hudson River at the Tappan Zee. And this will cause enormous damage to critical habitat that is used by endangered species. The Atlantic sturgeon, which is a keystone species in the Hudson River, it's been around in the river for thousands of years. There are less than 1,000 Atlantic sturgeon left in the river at this time, and they were recently listed by the federal government as endangered species under the Endangered Species Act. And so, we have concerns that the ecosystem is being damaged by this proposal if it goes forward the way it is. We believe there are alternatives to constructing the bridge that would not have such a major impact through this dredging process, and that could result in less damage overall to the river. And so, we want to make sure the process, especially with endangered species, goes forward in a way that looks at those impacts and makes sure that we're preserving habitat where we can, and that we're building a bridge responsibly in the end. So I think I'm going to wrap up there. Just one last quick comment. It's interesting that the speakers before me, and I think if you look at the news reports, there hasn't been much talk of how we're going to pay for this bridge. And I think that's a big question that a lot of us are avoiding, and it's a tough question, but I think it needs to be answered by the governor and answered by the state before we go forward with this. There was some news coverage a few weeks ago where Governor Cuomo was quoted as saying, we'll build the bridge with some toll hikes on the thruway and toll hikes on the bridge. We had an expert do a study of what those toll hikes could result in, and they could potentially result in double or triple the current tolls. And we're concerned about jobs and we're concerned about cost. Very, very high tolls on a bridge like this can have other economic effects and can cause economic burdens to people using the bridge, and can force changes in traffic patterns and other things that can really have a negative effect on this. So we need a clear plan from the governor on how to pay for this bridge, whether it's a combination of state and federal funds. whether it's going to be raising tolls on the entire thruway or on the bridge itself. Those questions, I think, need to be answered satisfactorily to the public before we go forward on this process. And on the jobs question, I think, you know, we of course are fighting for the fish in the Hudson River, and it's very easy, and we hear it all the time that, you know, it's, well, you're more concerned with fish than you are with the economy, and that's certainly not true. We're very concerned with the economy. We believe you can have both. You can have a clean environment and a healthy environment, and you can build a new bridge if you need to, and you know, you can figure out a way to do it with the least environmental impacts. But what we have before us today does not answer these questions and does not address these concerns. And so I'll leave it there. I look forward to questions from you all. Thank you.
Segas and all panelists. Before I pass this around for questions, I do have a question for you, and that is, how long would this construction project take, and what steps have been taken to ease the impact on those communities that are basically on both sides of the Hudson River, and anyone who wants to field that?
I mean, the construction application itself is considered to be a 4 to 5 year construction phase to build the bridge. It's being done under a new form of construction contracting in New York State. It's design build, which wasn't approved for use in New York State until last December. That essentially is that the design build teams, which includes a contractor, designer, and other necessary components to a construction application, are brought together to prepare proposals that is submitted to the state, and the project is actually designed and built at the same time in phases. So it's about a 4 to 5 year span. As far as the community impacts are concerned, there are some very strict guidelines in the proposals that the design build teams need to address with regard to activity on the shorelines as it relates to the bridge. Most of the activity in the first couple of years will take place in the middle of the river. A lot of that to be supplied by boat and barge and tug. Then beyond that, when the connections ultimately take place, as the bridge is designed, the bridge will be about 300 feet to the north of the existing bridge at center span, but it will land essentially at the same locations that the current bridge lands. So the land construction will take place later in the project and will be phased in.
Thank you. Questions?
This is for anybody. When we worked on 287 a while back, it took about 10 years, and they're still digging around, and the cost overruns were catastrophic. Is there anything in this project, either at the planning stage currently or prospectively, which would, number one, provide some assurance that the thing will be built on a time schedule which is rational, and secondly, that the cost overrun won't be excessive?
Well, okay, I wanted to see if anybody else wanted to answer that, but
no.
As far as time and cost are concerned, when you build a project design build, the liability, all of the requirements for completing the project on time, and the costs for completing the project in budget are placed on the proposers, the design build team. So in other words, when the design, it's not like a traditional project where the government designs the project, a contractor bids it based on the design, and then ultimately the job gets built based on the design and the bid. The problem with 287, of course, was different. Here it was design, bid, build, not design, build. So there's controls in here that places the burden on the design builder to develop the cost parameters for the project and make sure it gets built for that and within the time frame that it's supposed to. Short of any major change made by the owner, which in this case would be New York State.
Do also keep in mind that the phase that we're looking at right now is for replacement of the bridge. If in fact a mass transit component is added, that would be a second project after the bridge is completed 5-6 years from now.
Can I add just a quick comment to that? And just very briefly, I think, one question, and I don't know the answer to this, is, the company that's doing the 287 construction project, it would be good to find out if that's one of the companies that's actually bidding on the bridge project. I think that'd be a good question for the public to answer. It is?
Yeah.
So Veronica says it is. So
Yeah, it's one
that's a
of
big
the
concern.
4
And,
teams.
and Ross has said we have a better process this time for making sure the cost overruns don't happen. But again, this also goes back to this question about cost and how we're going to pay for this, because you have to build in cost overruns into these kinds of projects, and it's not clear that's been done in this case.
So, from what I'm hearing, there are 2 alternatives currently on the table, the short span replacement and the long span. Can you tell us how the decision will be made between those 2 alternatives? And also, what has been the public participation process up until this point, and what will it be going forward?
Well, sure. Thank you. With regards to the public participation process, so the public has had an opportunity to weigh in. There was a scoping process where the state sort of released its initial plans, and the public had an opportunity to review these preliminary plans and weigh in, and there were some scoping hearings. And then the state released its draft environmental impact study, and the public had an opportunity to weigh in on that document as well. And those just concluded. Those were the end of February and early March. And that was what Ross had mentioned earlier, that during that process, or during the draft environmental impact study comment period, about 650 comments were submitted to the state. And the public was able to weigh in at both public hearings. There was one in Westchester and one in Rockland. But for those who weren't able to speak publicly, they were able to submit their comments to the state on, online or via submitting them in letter form. And at this point, what the state must do now is prepare a final environmental impact study and address all the comments that were submitted to the state. So during this DEIS, this draft comments period. So the state is currently reviewing all these 650 comments and must respond to them all and then present them to the public then again. And then the public has another opportunity to weigh in.
Was there a citizens advisory committee? Was there a citizens advisory committee all along?
For the original plan, when they were looking at, for the original plan, when they had the 287 corridor included and they had 6 different options for the bridge, there were a number of stakeholder advisory working groups, and those did meet for 3 to 4 years. There was one group that specifically met to address environmental impacts, and the stakeholder advisory working group was comprised of stakeholders in the area, including public individuals that lived in the area, businesses that would be impacted by the area, and local law enforcement and fire and police agencies, as well as county legislatures. And one of the other groups, stakeholder advisory working groups, did sit down and look at the actual engineering and construction and the different options of the bridge, which kind of ties back to your question about short span versus long span. When the final draft environmental impact study comes out, it doesn't only go over environmental issues, environmental as you're thinking, trees and fish and animals. It does have a component in there about structural engineering. It also has a component in there about noise. It does have the traditional environment components, and it also has a section at the bottom with a compare and contrast so that you can see how the options weigh against each other and you know why a specific option was chosen, the pros and cons of it versus those that weren't.
And I'd like to just add 2 points to the public participation piece because I think they're very important. So the state has met its minimum requirements for public participation. It has provided the opportunity by law to the public to comment on the scoping documents and the draft environmental impact statement, and by law did supply the public with a 30-day comment period, which was then extended to 45 days. And we heard Philip talk a little bit about how short that window of comment period was for this mega infrastructure project. And he gave an example by comparison of a much smaller project that was very local that had a longer comment period. The second point that I want to make is that though the state has provided by law, again, its opportunity for the public to comment, it has not supplied all the data for the public to comment on. And that is one of the biggest points of contention, not only for Tri-State, but for other groups like Riverkeeper and the League of Women Voters and PACE Environmental Law Clinic. And again, we have not received the state's substantiation for its costs for this bus rapid transit system to analyze them and look at them and challenge the state on why this system would cost upwards of $5.3 billion. And that has been a big criticism during this process, that the public has not had all the information available and has not been made available by the state to adequately comment and provide analysis during this process. And we still have not received that information, but the state does have it because it has, again, used it to substantiate its reason for dropping transit from the project.
A few years back, the Hamilton Fish Bridge was completed, which is, I guess, the Newburgh, more commonly known as the Newburgh Beacon Bridge. And they added a brand new bridge in the 84 corridor. What was the environmental impact then, or whether there's any negativity, or what was the findings as to that bridge? And is there any comparison to the new Tappan Zee Bridge?
I believe, the Tappan Zee will be a much larger project. Given the design that's being proposed for the Tappan Zee, it's much bigger. And Ross may know this, I don't know what the actual dredging impacts were at the time. I was not with Riverkeeper at the time, so to be honest, I don't know what the exact impacts were. But our knowledge now about that area of the river is that it's fairly healthy and there's habitat there. And what happens with bridges is, and what's happened with the existing Tappan Zee is, once a bridge is in, and depending on what the construction damage, I guess is the best word, what the construction impacts were to the river, the habitat over time can fill in and can reestablish itself. And the bridge pilings on the Tappan Zee actually are, their habitat kind of develops around those. And so I think with the Newburgh Bridge, it's kind of, the habitat's reestablished around it to some degree. We have kind of contamination and pollution problems throughout the river because of General Electric PCBs and things like that. But that's, in terms of direct impacts, I think, our concern with the Tappan Zee Bridge is the way they're proposing to build it is to dredge this trench, basically, that transects the Hudson across the entire river. So that destroys hundreds of acres of habitat that we know is used by endangered species. It also, they would be building permanent structures on either side of the river near the shoreline that would destroy shoreline habitat, which is very critical ecologically for fish species. So, it's a little hard to do the exact comparison, but I think that it's a larger project. From what we've seen, it's going to have very large impacts on the river.
Just let me say one thing in response to that too, if you don't mind. And I don't want to diminish the impact on the river or the ecosystem life in the Hudson River. I've lived on the Hudson River almost my entire life as a child and into my adulthood, and raised my family on it as well. So I know the river well since 1956 when I first moved to Rockland County. When the new bridge opened, by the way, that gave access to my family to move up from the Bronx into Rockland County. We're dealing with a river that's 180 miles long. We're dealing with a corridor that's 180 feet wide, essentially, for the bridge. Admittedly, there are piers going out into the river, but the impact on the Hudson River ultimately will be minimal. The effect of dredging, any dredging that may take effect, because the design build teams actually will have the opportunity to propose building the foundations and footings with or without dredging. There are methods that are available to them to do so without dredging. So that's up to the design build teams that will be submitting their proposals here in the next couple of months about what dredging, how much dredging, where the spoils will ultimately find a home out in the Atlantic Ocean or elsewhere. Not dissimilar to dredging that takes place along the Long Island Sound or in the tributaries that feed into the Sound today. So we think the impacts ultimately, while are temporary, number one, that whatever disruption occurs, the river life comes back and finds its home again, and it has with the Tappan Zee Bridge, and that there won't be any significant loss of ecosystem because of the Tappan Zee Bridge in that 180-foot wide corridor that's being built.
Are there existing plans with what to do with the old bridge if a new,
My question.
if a new bridge is built?
It's my understanding. Can you hear me? It's okay. Oh, thank you. It's my understanding that in the request for proposals of the construction firms that the construction bidders have been instructed to submit plans for removing the existing bridge.
Removing, just removing.
Correct. Demolishing. Taking it out of the river. Though the governor, as we have heard in the media, had expressed, had indicated that it was an interesting idea, the High Line, converting it into a park was an interesting idea, but then subsequently after he made that comment, he did instruct the engineering firms that are bidding on this project to include in their design the removal of the existing bridge.
Well, that was in the original proposal.
That was
It was in the original proposal to replace and remove the bridge.
Right.
I, like many of you, watch television, and there are very many commercials on for Governor Cuomo. And I think he's a wonderful guy, and he's in the right party and stuff like that. But if you listen carefully, you see that those are paid for by the construction industry. And I think with all of our efforts in the public domain, we should really focus on the construction industry and their feeling towards the mass transit situation. Because it's not that I don't trust anybody, but I think if jobs were at stake, you want the jobs now, and any delay that might incur because of an additional expense would not be good. And I think the governor has his ear pretty much glued to what the construction folks are telling him, as if you want it, we want this, we need this, we're paying for all of this stuff, we helped you get elected, and now you got to deliver. And so I was wondering if there's any speculation on the part of the panel as to why the governor is reluctant to endorse the mass transit, which seems as close to a no-brainer as anyone could consider when you're talking about a new bridge. I mean, we've known for forever, since before the first bridge was built, that we have a lack of public transit in this area. People want to go to Lower Manhattan to work. They need a way of getting there without 16 connections and using a car. So, you know, it's very difficult to understand why the governor is dragging his feet, and I would suggest that the construction world could be the most important ally in the process.
I agree. And I'd also add that, you know, labor is not divided, the transit labor and those unions that represent transit manufacturers and operators and maintenance workers have weighed in very publicly in support of transit on the bridge, of course. And we know that and Ross started, you know, his comments saying that we're not in disagreement about getting this bridge going and the importance of construction jobs. I'd just like to add that I think one of the biggest threats to the construction industry right now, more so than this Tappan Zee Bridge not moving forward, is what's happening at the federal level in Congress. You know, very briefly, the federal government is supposed to reauthorize the federal transportation bill, which pays for transportation infrastructure projects throughout the entire country. And this bill expired in 2009, and what Congress is doing is extending it in short spurts. And that is costing hundreds of thousands of jobs around the country. And what we need is for the House of Representatives to pass this bill, which would help fund the transportation industry and help get these jobs going. And that is not happening. So I would love to see, nationwide, the construction industry being, and I'm sure they have been, but very vocal about Congress and specifically the House of Representatives passing this bill, because that is really the biggest threat to the construction industry and to construction jobs right now.
What's it called, the Transportation Act?
Yes, it was known as Safety Lou. Safety Lou,
Yes.
and now there's a new proposal, MAP 21, that's being proposed to replace it.
That was
And
passed
it's,
in the Senate.
And as Veronica says, I mean, it's been a critical impact, not only on the construction industry, but the economy in general. Without a sound, efficient transportation system, our economy goes nowhere, and we need to get it back in good state of good repair and make sure it's doing its job.
Based on what has been said this morning, a new bridge will take anywhere from 5 or 6 to 10 years to be completed. How safe is the existing bridge, and what's being done to make it safe?
There
There are ongoing projects right now for replacing deck on the Tappan Zee. They're working on the west side of the bridge. Deck replacements had taken place on the east side of the bridge about a decade ago. In the meantime, there are also steel refurbishing contracts underway. What they cannot address and deal with are the submarine issues, which are significant. Cracked foundations, cracked footings, boring, these boring animals that are boring into the wood piles. So those issues are not being addressed and cannot be addressed. What really gave rise to this whole issue was last August, if you recall, there was an earthquake in Virginia. And that earthquake was a pretty significant shaker. It was about 5.7 on the Richter scale. The Tappan Zee Bridge is not built to any seismic condition. When it was designed, it was not designed to withstand seismic activity. It sits in a causeway. The West Causeway sits in what's been described as a transportation leader in this region as a bowl of oatmeal, this 600 to 700 foot deep silt basin. And the concerns were that if an earthquake were to strike in this region, that it could cause some serious damage to the bridge. And it was right after that when Governor Cuomo got on the stump and said, we have to replace this bridge now, we cannot wait. So that's when he looked for this and got the Obama administration to agree with this expedited process. There were only 14 projects in the nation that were approved for this expedited process, 6 of which are transportation infrastructures, 3 of which are bridges. This is one of 3 bridges in the nation that are being looked at on an expedited basis. And part of the concern was, on the state's part, was that we felt the shaking here. You remember people were running out of buildings in Manhattan. So the concern here, of course, is could that kind of an occurrence take place here? And the answer is it's possible, yes. The Ramapo fault exists, and it's possible.
Just one other thing to add to that. Just one other thing to add to that. In the actual DEIS study, the Draft Environmental Impact Study, for both the original option, including the 287 corridor, and the option that is on the table, there is an entire section, which we talked about briefly earlier, for rehabilitation of the bridge, and that entire section addresses what is currently ongoing maintenance and what maintenance would be needed in the future in order to keep the bridge viable as an ongoing transportation route. So that is in there.
Just very quickly, just another comment on the rehabilitation option. You know, as recently as 2008, in this whole previous process, the state put out a number of fact sheets and talked about what the rehabilitation of the bridge would cost and how they could do a seismic retrofit of the existing bridge. And this is not to say that this should be the option we look at, but it definitely should be further explained to the public why either that's too expensive or it will take too long. But keep in mind there are bridges around Manhattan. I was on the river yesterday. We went under the Broadway Bridge, which crosses the Harlem River. That just underwent a significant seismic retrofit. They retrofit bridges for seismic concerns all the time, and they don't tear them down or replace them just because they have concerns about dealing with earthquakes. So, again, this is not to say that's what we should do. This is to say we need a better explanation of what the costs and benefits are before we go forward with such a massive project. So, thank you.
I'm interested, one, I'm finding the vocabulary fascinating, just learning the different words that you guys need to use in your words of art, really, that you use. So just an observation about that. But as someone who has been on the Tappan Zee Bridge, I would say that most of us approach that bridge with a sense of resignation. You know that you are going to be waiting to get on that bridge for a while, and if it's a Sunday or a nice day or a certain time of year, you know that when you come back from wherever you're going, Woodbury Commons, you're going to be on that access route for a long time. I'm hearing you talk about replacing the bridge and refurbishing it or boosting it so that it meets current standards, but you're not really talking, I hear what you're saying, Veronica, about more lanes, but they have other uses. Will the bridge, if it is replaced, acknowledge the fact that the access to the bridge on both sides needs to be expanded in some way so that you're not waiting 45 minutes sometimes to get onto the bridge?
The actual answer to that is the original proposal. The actual answer to that is the original proposal that has been taken off of the table did the necessary improvements to the 287 corridor and to the approach in Rockland County. Unfortunately, due to funding and due to the governor's office for the quicker DEIS study and the faster approach to get something moving now, they have shortened that scope and they are only going to do the actual bridge itself. The work for the 287 corridor and the work for the Rockland side has been taken off the table at this point in time. So you will have a expanded transportation on the bridge, and there will be obviously very short connecting pieces when you get off the bridge, but you will be exiting and entering onto the current existing structures that are there.
As a former mayor here and as a past chair, of the Westchester County Planning Board, as a past chair of the Westchester County Planning Board and as a member of the task force that Ross was on, what you need to be able to do is read between the lines of what these very learned and competent, wonderful panelists have said. And if you have a deeper background, the first thing is to build the bridge. What you heard was that the scope was shortened so that the bridge could be built. If you re-expand that scope, you'll study it for 20 years. So to get the bridge built, you need the shortened scope. Then they've laid all the groundwork for the transportation, mass transit that would then address the transportation. We couldn't come to agreement in Westchester County on where the BRT bus stations would be. For BRT to work effectively, you needed dedicated bus lanes or it wouldn't be fast enough for people to get out of their cars. So to do all that was a long study working with the 11 municipalities along the corridor. I can only speak to the Westchester side, and Rockland had its own issues. So the bridge needs to be built, and if you expand that scope, you can't build it quickly enough to catch this federal funding and this federal program. And so you have to listen very carefully to what they're saying and parse out those words. And it's right for the public to challenge it and put the pressure on, but the bridge needs to be built.
I'd just like to add that there is no federal funding for this. There's no guaranteed federal funding, and there is no federal program. In fact, this project is one of 14 infrastructure projects that the president has identified as priority projects. That is correct, which is why the Tappan Zee Bridge is on an expedited timeline and review process. There is no guaranteed money for this project as it stands today. the state has applied for a federal loan called a TIFIA loan. It is a loan from the federal government that has not yet been awarded by the federal government. There is no funding, not $1 of funding from the federal government that will be given to this project as of today. And again, I just want to reiterate, the state has applied for a federal loan called a TIFIA loan. Again, that is a loan that must be paid back by New York State taxpayers.
It's only for part of
And it's only for part. Yes, thank you, Philip. It has applied for $2 billion. The loan would be for $2 billion.
It's called TIFIA?
TIFIA.
TIFIA. And the ironic thing about TIFIA is that 20% of the criteria is based on environmental sustainability characteristics, which this bridge does not have. So it'll be interesting to see. Quite frankly, I don't think that the federal government will not award this loan to New York State. Again, the President has identified the Tappan Zee Bridge as one of these 14 priority projects, so we don't envision the federal government not approving this application, but it is a loan and it must be paid back.
One more question?
Yeah, just an observation. You made reference to the transportation bill before the House, and I think if you put it in the context of trying to close a military base, all the congressional districts agreed in unison, but if you tried to close that particular base, they take quick ownership. Case in point, he died a couple of years ago, who ran the Appropriations Committee for the military. He was a congressman out of Pennsylvania. Thank you very much. Would never allow bills to be cut back, and he was the architect of a very small airport built in the state of Pennsylvania, which hardly anybody uses. So we know what drives transportation statistically, and it is in the New York corridor as well as other parts of the country. But Georgia and Arkansas, West Virginia would be a prime example, will not cut back because the leadership in Washington will not look at a common cause. They will become very, very self-centered because that's how they sustain themselves for the next election. So you're in the middle of that, and I think the predominant thing, and Ross is a wonderful advocate, and all these people, Rivic here, because I think they make great observations. But the bottom line here, you're in an election year, and it's a money issue.
Any more questions?
Thank you. I don't need the microphone. I just was going to add, the animal that you're talking about digging, I think it's a Toreto worm. We had an old Commodore in our yacht club in the Bronx, and he kept warning us not to worry about the parking lot, worry about the pilings, because they were being eaten by these worms, and they're directly related to the cleanliness of the water. And as the water has improved in quality, these guys have come back in and are now doing a job.
Like the
on
striped
wooden
bass.
pilings.
The striped bass is eating everything else.
Be careful what you wish.
Right.